The diary is small enough to fit in one hand. Brown leather, cracked spine, brass clasp worn smooth from years of pressure. Inside, the paper has turned the color of weak tea, and the ink has bled into the fibers like something trying to disappear. But the handwriting remains precise, careful, measured. And on the first surviving page, dated October 14, 1889, there is a line written with unusual firmness. "I worked beside them again today. They moved the stone before sunrise. I was told not to describe their height." The entry is not dramatic. There are no exclamation marks, no panic, no confusion. Only routine language, written by a man who believed he was recording ordinary work. Yet nothing about the scene he describes appears ordinary now. The official record states that the late 19th century was an era of rapid industrial expansion. Railroads spread across continents, cities rose from timber and brick, mines carved into mountains, canals redirected rivers. Engineers, laborers, and surveyors performed the work using steam power, dynamite, and human endurance. Progress was messy, loud, and visible. History textbooks describe it as the triumph of ingenuity over terrain, and the diary's author, according to census records, fits neatly into that timeline. His name appears in employment ledgers as a survey assistant for a regional infrastructure project. He was paid modest wages. He lived in a boarding house. He wrote letters to his mother every Sunday. Nothing unusual. Until the pages of his diary begin to describe measurements that do not match the scale of the tools available to him. In entry after entry, he records distances moved in hours that modern crews struggle to achieve with cranes and diesel engines. He describes stones lifted without scaffolding, foundations dug through dense rock in a single afternoon, and footprints. Always footprints. Not metaphorical ones, not symbolic references. Physical impressions in soil and clay, measured with rulers and recorded in inches. The official explanation for such records is simple. Workers exaggerated. Memory drifted. Language was loose. Industrial progress often felt miraculous to people living through it. That explanation is reasonable. It accounts for enthusiasm, for pride, for storytelling. But it does not account for the precision. Because the diary does not read like a story. It reads like a logbook. Numbers are consistent. Times are exact. Descriptions repeat with mechanical regularity. And that consistency introduces a possibility that historians rarely discuss openly. What if the diary is not exaggerating at all? What if it is documenting a workforce that does not fit comfortably into modern categories of labor, machinery, or human capability? Not mythical giants from folklore, not fantasy creatures from legends, but individuals whose size and strength were once observed, recorded, and then quietly removed from official narratives because their existence complicated the story of industrial progress. That idea sounds extraordinary, but the record does not begin with theory. It begins with measurements. On November 3, 1889, the author records the excavation of a trench near a rail junction. The trench was intended to anchor a stone retaining wall. According to the diary, the crew completed the task before midday. The trench measured 30 feet long, 8 feet deep, and was cut into compacted shale. Modern excavation manuals estimate that such work, performed with hand tools and early blasting powder, requires a team of 10 to 15 laborers working continuously for several days. Even with mechanical assistance, the process is slow because shale fractures unpredictably. Yet the diary describes the trench as finished in less than 4 hours. And then it adds a detail that appears almost casually. The tall men descended first. They removed the upper layer in single lifts. The rest of us cleared the fragments. The language is not poetic. It is procedural. The tall men performed the heavy action. The others handled debris. The pattern repeats across dozens of entries. There was another record from December 1889 describing the placement of foundation stones for a municipal building. Each block weighed approximately 6 tons. The official engineering plan specified the use of pulleys, ramps, and teams of draft animals. But the diary describes a different sequence. The stone was raised without rigging. 2 of them set it in position while the foreman checked alignment. No machinery mentioned, no animals, no scaffolding, only coordination. And again, the tone remains calm, routine, unimpressed. The stone remembers. The record is still there. Physical evidence supports at least part of the account. The municipal building referenced in the diary still stands today. Its foundation stones remain perfectly aligned. No visible chisel marks. No evidence of incremental lifting or repositioning. Each block rests flush against the next, forming seams so tight that even modern restoration crews struggle to insert measuring blades between them. Engineers attribute this precision to skilled craftsmanship and careful planning. That explanation is credible. Stonemasons of the 19th century were highly trained, but skill alone does not reduce weight, and craftsmanship does not accelerate time. What matters is not whether the builders were talented. What matters is how quickly the work was completed. City Council minutes from that same winter confirm the construction timeline. The foundation phase concluded in 8 days. Payment vouchers were issued accordingly. Inspection reports note satisfaction with progress. No delays recorded. No disputes filed. The schedule was met. The next piece of evidence appears in a photograph taken in early 1890. The image shows a group of workers standing beside a newly completed rail embankment. They wear wool coats and heavy boots. Their faces are blurred slightly by long exposure, but in the background, partially obscured by shadow, there are figures whose proportions do not match the rest of the group. Their shoulders sit higher than the top of the locomotive's boiler. Their hands appear large enough to wrap around iron rails. Historians have examined the photograph and concluded that perspective distortion explains the discrepancy. Wide-angle lenses can exaggerate size differences. Uneven terrain can elevate individuals unexpectedly. Those factors are real. They must be considered. Yet the photograph was taken on level ground. Survey stakes visible in the foreground confirmed the grade, and the camera lens used for the exposure was a standard plate format, not a distortion-prone design. The official explanation accounts for possibility, but it does not eliminate doubt. There is another photograph, stored in a regional archive, showing the construction of a stone bridge in the same year. Workers stand in rows along the arch, holding tools for scale. Most appear average in height, 5 feet, 6 feet, typical proportions. But near the center of the image, there is a figure whose head nearly touches the keystone. The arch itself measures 18 feet from base to crown. Archivists have labeled the figure as a supervisor, standing on elevated footing. That interpretation seems reasonable at first glance. However, the man's boots rest on the same stone surface as the others. No platform visible, no ladder present, only height, and silence in the caption. The pattern does not end with photographs. It extends into engineering records. Blueprints from the period contain annotations describing oversized handling teams assigned to specific tasks. The term appears repeatedly, written in neat block letters along the margins of construction diagrams. Oversized handling teams. The phrase is unusual. It does not refer to equipment. It does not refer to animals. It refers to personnel. Payroll documents show that these teams received higher wages than standard labor crews. They were assigned shorter shifts, and their names were sometimes replaced with initials rather than full identification. That substitution is subtle, easy to overlook, But in bureaucratic systems, missing names often signal restricted information. The mainstream explanation for these irregularities is administrative convenience. Large projects generate complex paperwork. Abbreviations simplify record-keeping. That reasoning holds weight, yet it fails to explain why the initials appear only beside tasks involving the heaviest loads. Why not use the same shorthand for clerks, for drivers, for carpenters? Why reserve it for the most physically demanding operations? The question widens when geological surveys enter the conversation. In several locations associated with the diary's author, investigators have documented excavation marks that exceed the reach of standard tools from the period. Cuts into bedrock appear smooth and continuous, as if produced by a single sweeping motion rather than repeated strikes. Geologists attribute these formations to controlled blasting, followed by manual finishing. That explanation aligns with known mining practices. But blasting leaves fractures, irregular edges, debris patterns. These cuts show none of those features. Instead, they display uniform curvature, consistent depth, and minimal fragmentation. Precision at scale. The pattern repeats across multiple regions separated by hundreds of miles. Rail corridors, canal systems, stone quarries, different crews, different supervisors. Same geometry. What changed was the explanation. There is another category of evidence that receives less attention because it appears mundane. Legal language. In 1888, 1 year before the diary entries begin, a municipal ordinance introduced a new classification for labor contracts. The category was labeled exceptional physical operators. The definition is brief. Workers possessing unusual capacity for the manipulation of heavy materials without mechanical assistance. The ordinance established guidelines for liability coverage and injury compensation specific to this group. Insurance premiums were adjusted accordingly. The language suggests recognition of risk and recognition of difference. Yet the category disappears from legal records within a decade. No repeal notice, no public debate, simply absence. Historians interpret the disappearance as bureaucratic consolidation. Labor classifications often evolve as industries mature. That explanation is practical, but it leaves one question unanswered. Why create a category so specific only to erase it without documentation? The scale of the pattern becomes clearer when infrastructure timelines are compared. Across multiple states, major construction projects completed during the late 19th century share an unusual characteristic. They finished ahead of schedule. Bridges erected months early, rail lines laid faster than projected, foundations poured in record time. Newspapers from the era celebrated efficiency. Editors praised disciplined management and tireless workers. But buried within those articles are occasional references to remarkable strength displayed by unnamed laborers. The descriptions are brief, one sentence, two at most. Then the narrative returns to familiar themes of progress. No follow-up interviews, no detailed profiles, just acknowledgement and movement forward. A fair assessment requires examining alternative explanations. Steam technology improved rapidly during this period. New pulley systems increased lifting capacity. Hydraulic jacks allowed precise positioning of heavy loads. Innovation mattered. There is no question about that. But machinery leaves traces, mounting points, wear patterns, maintenance logs. In many of the sites connected to the diary, those traces are missing. Instead, the structural components show direct placement without intermediate supports. Stone resting on stone. Beam seated into socket. Clean connections. The absence of mechanical residue does not prove extraordinary labor, but it challenges the assumption that machines performed the work. The pattern expands further when demographic data is examined. Census records from several industrial towns list temporary residents described as contract specialists. Their occupations are not specified. Their birthplaces are often marked as unknown, and their departure dates cluster within narrow time windows. Arrival, employment, disappearance. No family records, no burial sites. Administrative footprints without personal histories. Sociologists suggest that these individuals were migrant workers who moved frequently in search of higher wages. That explanation fits broader economic trends. Yet migrant workers usually leave evidence: letters, marriage licenses, property claims. Here, the paper trail ends abruptly. The pattern does not disappear, it shifts. Another line of evidence emerges from medical reports preserved in hospital archives. Physicians documented cases involving patients with unusually dense bone structures and enlarged joints. The reports describe individuals capable of lifting weights far beyond standard expectations without signs of strain. Doctors noted the anomalies with clinical curiosity, measurements recorded, observations filed, but no long-term studies conducted. The cases were treated as rare physiological variations, and then the files were closed. The explanation is not secrecy, it is categorization. When phenomena fall outside established frameworks, institutions often store them rather than investigate them. Not out of malice, out of practicality. Research funding follows predictable patterns. Science attention gravitates toward problems with clear definitions. Ambiguous anomalies receive less priority. The truth can fade without anyone intending to hide it. The final entries in the diary shift in tone. The handwriting becomes tighter, more deliberate. On February 2nd, 1890, the author writes a sentence that appears almost hesitant. The foreman instructed us not to discuss the scale of the work beyond official reports. No explanation provided, no justification recorded, just instruction. 2 weeks later, another entry appears. The tall men departed before dawn. Their tools were collected. We were told to continue as usual. After that date, references to unusual labor cease entirely. The diary continues for several months, documenting routine assignments, survey measurements, weather conditions, supply deliveries, normal work. Then the writing stops. No farewell entry, no summary. The last page contains only a date, June 17th, 1890. Blank space below. What remains is not proof of giants in the mythical sense. There are no bones displayed in museums, no preserved skeletons towering above crowds. What remains is a cluster of records that do not align perfectly with accepted explanations, measurements that exceed expectations, photographs that resist easy interpretation, legal categories that appear and vanish, infrastructure timelines that compress beyond predicted limits. Each piece of evidence, taken alone, can be explained. Perspective distortion, technological innovation, administrative simplification. But together, they form a pattern suggesting that the industrial world of the 19th century may have included a class of workers whose physical capabilities exceeded the assumptions built into modern historical narratives. Not supernatural beings, not legends. Workers. Individuals whose presence accelerated construction, reshaped landscapes, and then faded from documentation as industries standardized and technologies replaced manual strength. The earth still carries the marks of their labor. Stone blocks aligned with impossible precision, cuts through mountains that appear too clean for the tools available. Foundations resting on bedrock as if placed by hands capable of moving mass without hesitation. The stone remembers, and the record is still there. What changed was the explanation. History prefers continuity, clean timelines, predictable progress. Anomalies complicate that story. They introduce uncertainty. They demand new categories. and institutions often respond to complexity by simplifying the narrative until it fits established frameworks. Not because of conspiracy, because of efficiency, because rewriting textbooks is expensive, because acknowledging uncertainty invites debate, because the machinery of history moves slowly. The diary remains locked in archival storage, cataloged under routine classification. Researchers can request access. The pages can be examined. The measurements can be verified. Nothing about the document is hidden, yet few people ask to see it. The real question is not whether the theory sounds strange, but whether anyone with the tools to verify it has seriously looked.